And with that, I will introduce Chris Osgood, the director of our Office of Climate Resilience. Chris, go for it.
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you for your fantastic leadership of this project. Again, Chris Osgood, and on behalf of the mayor and behalf of our Chief Climate Officer, Brian Sweat, want to just echo Kate's thanks for all of you for joining us here tonight for this meeting. The focus of tonight's meeting is about how we move forward with a set of long-term plans and projects to address long-term flood risk here in Boston to protect you and your homes and your neighborhoods from coastal flooding. The context for this is our work in Climate Ready Boston, work that so many of you were directly involved in. And as we address coastal flood risk in our city, we're really looking at three different strategies that are happening at the same time, but focused on different time horizons. And you'll hear about all three tonight. Kyron Owens from our Office of Emergency Management will be talking about some of the work we're doing to address the nearest term flood risk. Kate will be highlighting some of the projects that the city is doing to address some of the midterm flood risk that we're seeing. But the bulk of the meeting is really about our collaboration with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and how we address long-term flood risk that our city, and in particular tonight, the North End, downtown, and the Wharf District faces. For the Army Corps, collaboration with them is often done through something called a coastal storm risk management study. That is what we are engaged in. It's a fantastic path to be able to really partner with the Corps and take advantage of the expertise and experience and capacity they bring to this charge. This is for Boston, as Kate will go through, a 6-year study, and we're roughly at the midpoint of that study. The last 3 years have been looking at the risk to Boston. The next 3 years are really looking at the response, the projects that we can be taking on and putting in place, as both Kate and Jeff Herzog and Lisa Winter from the Army Corps will talk through in the years and decades ahead. So with that, I will turn it back over to Kate, who will dive much more into the agenda. But overall, tonight, we want to make sure that we're providing you with context in the city's approach to flood risk generally, a deep dive into the process of our collaboration with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, an opportunity to talk about the specific places, the alignments along the coastline of the North End, Wharf District, and downtown that the Army Corps is looking at, and really importantly, talk through what those next steps look like in ways in which either tonight or in the days, months, and years ahead, you can all stay connected to this project and be able to have more direct conversations with the city and the Corps about it. So with that, thank you again for being here tonight, and I'll pass it back to Kate.
Thank you, Chris. Before we dive into tonight's presentation, I wanted to ask if there are any elected officials in the audience tonight. You can use the raise your hand feature just to acknowledge yourself. If we have any in the audience, please just raise your hand for me. Seeing none, I do want to ask if we have any members of the press that are in the room tonight that will also be recording tonight's presentation. You can also use the raise hand feature if you're a member of the press. All right, with that, we will go ahead and get started. So as Chris mentioned, we have a few goals tonight for our presentation to share with you all. We want to share out what the city's doing to prepare for today's storms. And we're joined by Matthew Kearney from the Office of Emergency Management tonight. Karan was not able to make it tonight due to an unforeseen circumstance, but we're lucky to have Matthew join us today. We'll share a little bit about what the city is doing to prepare for storms of the next decade and beyond, and where the U.S. Army Corps partnership aligns into that. We will also have time throughout the presentation to answer questions. So grab a notepad, jot them down as you go, or if you'd like, you can use the chat feature to answer questions, and we will circle back to them when we get to our pauses. We also are going to provide you all with next steps on how you can provide feedback to us and also get in touch with us. So lots more to come. So to kick things off, I just want to set the stage and provide a little background on how the U.S. Army Corps partnership work is building upon the work that we've been doing here in the city of Boston over the last decade, kicking it off in 2016 with the release of our Climate Ready Boston report. We really used this plan as the foundational data set for informing us what climate change impacts are going to look like, feel like, specifically here in Boston. So, how will we see extreme temperature changes, extreme precipitation, and increased frequency and intensity of rainfall events combined with sea level rise and more frequent coastal storms, which impact both our stormwater and our coastal flood risk? So, using the baseline scenarios, we were able to project those impacts over a short-term 2030 time horizon, mid-term 2050 time horizon, and a long-term by the end of this century 2070 time horizon. And so all of these informed what we would see for sea level rise and what we're using as assumptions as part of our coastal and climate resilience planning benchmarks. In 2017, the city of Boston released its Resilient Harbor Vision, which was really intended to be a step back and a look at all 47 coastal miles to see where the opportunities are for aligning our vision of an equitable and just waterfront by providing access where we don't have public access already, or improving the public realm along the waterfront that we already have. This big zoom out vision took a big look at where we, the city of Boston, can influence coastline, owning less than 20%, where our state partners might have an opportunity to help us, and where our private landowner in between contributes to this 47-mile coastline. So then, with the Resilient Harbor vision under the first step of completion, we moved into individual neighborhood planning. So, starting in 2017 with our first phase of East Boston and Charlestown, moving through all of our coastal neighborhoods, North End and downtown, including Wharf District, was completed in about 2020. And then the most recent plan was completed with phase two of East Boston and Charlestown in 2022. And all of these plans are really setting the if the Resilient Harbor Vision is setting the first stage, then these individual neighborhood plans set the second stage. So this process can sometimes feel like we are going in circles, and I want to reframe that for us all tonight to think about it in terms of a spiral staircase. So it might feel like we're going in planning circles, but we're continuously adding new information, making changes to what we had learned in the previous round, and then sharing out how this is informing the next stage of our design. So I invite everyone tonight to kind of put on their engineer hats and kind of think about this with us as we move from our conceptual plan or the neighborhood level two up to a preliminary design, working with our federal design partners in the Army Corps. So moving towards the third floor of preliminary design, but I highlight this just to show that we are still on the same track together of wanting to move towards construction and implementation of these coastal flood risk protection projects. So, however, I don't need to tell you all this, or just as a reminder, we don't need to wait for the future to see the impacts of coastal flooding. We're experiencing a lot of these coastal flood events today, highlighting as recent as January 2024, all the way back to 2018 when we had our Winter Storm Riley impacts. We are seeing the effects of sea level rise and climate change today. So, with that, I wanted to talk a little bit about our three approaches as an office before I introduce Matt. The way that the Office of Climate Resilience through the City of Boston is approaching these buckets of progress are three uh, tracks that are moving at the same time. We're working concurrently on all three of these. We have today's storms, which is strengthening our response to today's flooding through our collaboration with the Office of Emergency Management. And so I'd like to introduce Matthew Kearney with the Office of Emergency Management to help walk us through a quick overview of what OEM is working on. Matt, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. And you can move to the next slide. Awesome. So Matt Carney, I'm the deputy chief here with the Office of Emergency Management. Taking a look at today's storms, um, there's kind of the before, during, and after that our office takes a look at to help facilitate that cycle preparedness and just make sure that we're kind of able to respond to the threats and coastal flooding that we're seeing today. So on the far left end there, the months before the event. We do a lot of work around public education, going out to community events, making resources known that are available to folks, always advocating for folks to sign up for Alert Boston, the city's emergency notification platform. Internally, we do a lot of operational planning, so bringing our partners together, uh, building off of lessons learned or what we're seeing in other storms that may impact us in a similar way, seeing where the challenges, the stressors may be, and on our end, really getting a sense of where our operational partners are going to need the most help. So trying to predict or be better pre-positioned, if you will, so that we can help facilitate that coordination during the storms that we experience here in the city. In the days or hours leading up to the event, so we work real close with the National Weather Service. We're on a weekly call with them that they host for all emergency managers, getting an outlook on what's to come. And they're also really great about giving us a heads up on that 9 to 14 day outlook as well, when there's going to be some type of weather system that may have impacts to the city and kind of city services, the way we go about business. So we take a look at kind of what's coming our way, how that may impact city programming, city services, events that are going on, depending obviously on the time of year. And with that, that really helps us guide what decisions or protective actions we need to take as a city. So on the coastal flooding side, we have a number of deployable flood barriers that the city owns at City Hall Plaza, BCYF Center in South Boston, as well as on the Greenway. And we've got different thresholds in which we would look to put those in place. We also put out messaging to our private partners that are signed up through our internal distro list, letting us know that they have them, because we've got processes for when those go up, making sure that our public safety partners are notified, so that in the event that there's a 911 call to that location, they're aware of maybe some of the special considerations or equipment that they may need. And then during the storm, coordinating the response. Largely, that's what are the impacts, working real close with our utility partners, our nonprofit partners, and the kind of the cascading impacts. So there's flooding, if that displaces residents. What do our shelters look like? What type of mass care services do we need? So in the event, days leading up to it, we're kind of putting everybody on the same sheet of music, if you will, so that we have that one central point of contact, the city's emergency operations center, where we're able to really help coordinate and create one single common operating picture, so everyone has the most up-to-date information and kind of one place that they're going when they need information. And then after the event, always looking to build off of lessons learned. Did the storm impact us in the way that we thought it did? We'll often kind of do a recap with the National Weather Service on the forecasters, then seeing how they can improve. They're really great about seeing what products they put together that either helped us or didn't help us, and what we can do going forward to help shift that. And then we really build that into the overarching things. What other education tools do we need to be building into the work that we do in the community? Where do our plans need to be updated? And what kind of operational processes do we need to take a look at reframing? And then a lot of that lessons learned we help capture and pass off to Office of Climate Resilience Planning Department, folks who are really looking at those long-term mitigation and solutions to help inform their work. Next slide. So talking a little bit about the education and outreach, we've got the Know Your Zone campaign, which is geared towards the city's hurricane evacuation zone. We'd have Deployables Day, which we had our second annual one this year, where we ask all of our partners to test their deployables, and we put on the ones that the city of Boston owns, bring in vendors, which is both an opportunity to test them as well as raise awareness. So we held it on City Hall Plaza last September, looking to expand it next year. Next slide. And then I kind of already ran through this. The storm response really starts 96 hours out with that partnership with the National Weather Service. And then the internal communication really spins up 2 days out when we get a real good sense of what those impacts will be. It's always a balancing act, right, between the lead time that departments and the public needs in order to take protective actions, as well as when we have the most confidence in the forecast itself, which then kind of drives that partnership, the work we do with parks, water and sewer, property management, public works, and others in the 24 hours leading up to it. And I really covered a lot of this, so I apologize. You can skip to the next slide, which I'm sure is, yeah, building off the improvement process. So these are some of the examples of our dashboards and tools that we use to visualize flooding or storm impacts in the city. We've got a number of different plans that we reflect on that I mentioned that we do our operational planning based around. So the two kind of highlighted there are our hurricane and our flood hazard index, which drive the specific decision-making and factors that go into the nuanced response steps that we look at on that end. And I believe, is that the last slide I got, Kate?
It is.
Yes, thank you.
Matt, thank you so much. If folks have questions, when we get to a pause, we can see if there are questions about Office of Emergency Management work. And depending on how long you're able to stay on tonight, Matt, I'll be able to record questions too. So I will make sure they find their way to the Office of Emergency Management. But thank you. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you.
So as Matt mentioned, that's how we're working on today's storms and managing the response of today. The Office of Climate Resilience is also looking at, with partners in the Planning Department and the Parks and Recreation Department, this decade's storms, which are near-term priority projects that were identified in those neighborhood plans. So for North End, Downtown, and Wharf District, here are just a few examples. The Langone Park and Pueblo Playground project was completed in 2020 by the Parks and Recreation Department. And this is a great example of coastal flood protection. Maybe you didn't even know it. So underneath those benches, and Jeff, I know we'll talk a little bit about this when we get into our toolkit, but a great example of how coastal resilience is built into the capital update of that park project. In progress now, we have Long Wharf through the Planning Department Coastal Delivery section, working on the next steps in that, going up the spiral staircase, going to the next phase of designing for Long Wharf. And then we are in the process of initiating the design process, so more to come as the Parks and Recreation Department works on the Christopher Columbus Park resilience designs. So that process will be kicking off soon, and I urge people to check back at the boston.gov website when that project is shared live. And that brings me to beyond 2030, and we're transforming our 47 miles of coastline for long-term planning to the end of this century. So really looking at that long-term design impact and how working with partners through the Planning Department, through Boston Water and Sewer Commission, also working with the Parks Department and Office of Emergency Management, where we're really taking the lead with the Army Corps for what opportunities we have shared in these spaces. So after completion of our neighborhood level plans, we were able to work with the U.S. Army Corps to enter into the Coastal Storm Risk Management Feasibility Study. That's the name of the report we are working on with them now. It is a 6-year study that was started in 2022 because we have a shared interest in coastal flood risk mitigation, or protecting people, life safety, critical infrastructure, evacuation corridors, critical transportation routes, and also protecting existing natural resources. And the Army Corps has a specific process that they follow. So like I mentioned, that our Boston CSRM is a specific, the Coastal Storm Risk Management Feasibility Study is a specific process that they follow to be able to design, evaluate, and select projects. So it's standardized across the country. And that report will be the key that can unlock up to 65% federal funding for the design and construction of projects that we select. So without having this first study completed, we cannot unlock future federal cost matching for that work. So where we're at in our study, up till this point, between 2022 and today, the Corps has been really focusing on defining the inaction, getting up to speed on all of their processes like the coastal hazard system, flood model, working on what the projections might be if we don't take action. And this year has been the kickoff, 2025, of really getting pen to paper and defining where the Army Corps can help us to build and what exactly those tools will be that could fit the location that we would look to build. And Jeff will talk more about this process. But ultimately, where we're going is this is a 6-year study. We're halfway through. At the end of our 6 years, which is on schedule to be in 2028, we will deliver a study report to Congress that then will go into the next steps for development. So I bring up our big picture zoom out because I want to make a couple points. Number one, in 2028, we will have a 35% engineering design for projects that we will have as early action projects. We will not be constructing those projects until they get through the remainder of design, so from 35% to 100%. So the likelihood or the approximate shovel in the ground start date for construction for many of the project areas we'll talk about tonight are not planned for construction until the 2030s. So that's why we're focusing on those long-term design horizon flood pathways, because the construction process will take more time after we submit our first study to Congress. So with that, I'm going to do two things. First, I want to introduce Jeff Herzog, our project manager with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, New England Division. And we can see if there's any questions in the chat to answer quickly. But Jeff, take it away.
Thanks, Kate. Can I get a sound check?
Loud and clear.
Wonderful. Hey, good evening, everybody. On behalf of the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, the Honorable Adam Tell, as well as the North Atlantic Division Commander, Colonel Promotable Jesse Curry, and our New England District Commander, Colonel Justin Pavis. Thank you for taking the time tonight out of a busy week as we get ready for this holiday mass exodus and celebration period to come and join us tonight for an informational update on the City of Boston Coastal Storm Risk Management study. So thank you. As Kate mentioned, my name is Jeff Herzog. I'm the lead planner and program manager on behalf of the Corps of Engineers New England District. And I also have on the call tonight Ms. Lisa Winter, who is the lead engineer. And really, I mean, truly, she's the brains behind the operation. So we're blessed to have her on the team. I just really want to let everybody know, yes, we are an Army organization. Yes, we have a 3-star general, Lieutenant General Butch Graham. Yes, we have a district commander who is a full bird colonel, Colonel Justin Pavis. However, we are truly an organization made up of 38,000 plus civil servants. And so although I was retired, I am retired active duty service. Many people, including Lisa, never put on a uniform, and yet they still dedicate their time and life to civil service and to the important mission of these type of community projects. So thank you for that. And so tonight we've got some of these slides here. Whenever you see this slide up, it's your opportunity to ask questions. But as we go through tonight, if it feels like I'm kind of rushing through, it's because we have, rather than one specific neighborhood tonight that we're going to be covering, we're covering all 3 areas across downtown Wharf District and North End. And so I really want to be able to get into the two-way communication and the back and forth. So in order to do that, I need to provide you some information. It's kind of that to from exercise. If I want to get information from you, I need to give you information. And so we'll talk a little bit about risk and what our goals and process looks like. And then we'll talk a little bit about if this is the risk that we're trying to manage, what are some of the tools in the toolkit that we can use to manage that risk. And then based off of that, we'll jump into some preliminary alignments. We don't have nice renderings. We don't have Climate Ready Boston renderings or anything like that. We don't have the Wharf District plan type renderings because we're not there yet. It's important for us to incorporate you all early on in this process. We're going to show you what the risk is. We're going to talk about some approaches that we can, but then we want your feedback to understand how these things impact us and you. As we go to the next slide, it's important for you all to recognize and for us to open up this conversation that these projects that we construct, very similar to the existing Boston Harbor today or projects across the nation, these are going to into perpetuity become a fabric, a key piece of the community's identity and character. And so we want to make sure that we include the community in identifying what those projects look like. So in order to do that, we have to kind of first talk about, what is the hazard that is facing the Boston Harbor community. And the truth is you've got 5 very different neighborhoods with very different ecological conditions, with 5 different conditions as far as the hazards go. And so I want to focus tonight on the downtown North End Wharf District areas where you don't have the Belle Isle Marsh. You don't have the Neponset River. You don't even have Constitution Beach. You have a community that was built right up to the water's edge for good reason, and it's because you are the navigational hub for New England, and for much of the U.S. from a commercial fishing perspective and fish packaging fleet. And so it's important to be able to get the ships back 200 years ago, get the ships to deep water quicker, hence Long Wharf. But with that being said, our forefathers, as many things as they did right, they weren't necessarily considering the fact of heavy vehicle traffic and skyscrapers built on the fill land that they used to get out to deep water. And so with that being said, we have what's called subsidence, or that is the earth is actually settling and sinking quite a bit. And maybe it's not sinking to the rate as New Orleans, but it is absolutely sinking. And with that, our forefathers also didn't consider, because from a navigation perspective, sea level rise actually isn't a bad thing. You get more deeper water quicker. But from a perspective of community safety, community risk, and storm risk, sea level rise has an adverse impact on the community. So when you combine that subsidence with the sea level rise, you have what we call sea level change. And that's why you see sea level change instead of sea level rise there. And it's not just the sea level rise. It is the fact that you have storm surge and wave action and erosion tied to that. So the city of Boston, Boston Harbor specifically, you all don't have as great a threat from tropical type events, hurricane events. What you have is you have a great risk of extratropical events. So perhaps you recognize, 3 to 5, 5 to 7 times a year, you have these extratropical nor'easters that bring some flooding and inundation and nuisance to the community with some heavy winds and precipitation. But consider the fact that when you compound that with sea level change, that's going to become more frequent in the future. The reality is, if you do your research on the meteorological events that are extratropical events, you'll see data that shows anywhere between 9 and 20 extratropical events each year. We don't notice them because they're not bringing the same types of hazards and impacts to the community. But in the future, with sea level change, we are going to start noticing it more frequently. And so that's one of the things that we want to focus on here. The difference between you all and say the Gulf Coast or even the lower Atlantic seaboard is an extratropical event could last anywhere from 1 day to 5 days. And so the idea of a tropical event, you're coming in, the storm comes, you've prepared for it, you ride it out for 12 hours, and then you start recovery. When you're talking about an extratropical event, you're talking about 1 to 5 days, you're talking about up to 10 tide cycles, And you're talking about some significant impact on mobility, as well as the ability to socioeconomic impacts, trying to get to work and trying to just live life while you're adapting to the storm conditions. And so that's one key difference. Another key difference is you don't have quarter mile wide beaches like you do in Wildwood, New Jersey, or Ocean City, New Jersey. You don't have significant beaches at all, or sand sources like you might see in the Florida region and other areas of the Gulf Coast. So it's real difficult when you're built right up to the water's edge to kind of defend against that. But at the same time, because you're in the inner harbor, you don't have the same wave action and wave attack that you do if you were right there along the coast, and you don't have the same erosion risks. So really what we are focused on is we are focused on the hazards tied to that wall of water that comes in, those wind-driven waves that are associated with an 11-foot tide swing that you see in Boston Harbor. So we're trying to focus on that and trying to focus on closing those long-term flood pathways associated with that. So if we jump to the next slide, this is not hyperbole. This is not me trying to scare you. This is what our U.S. Army Corps of Engineers modeling shows, a 1%. So commonly referred to as a 100-year event. The problem is when it happens twice in 1 year, how do you call it a 100-year event, right? So it's a probability. If you have 100% probability, 1% of the time you have the conditions that could cause this type of flooding. So it's a 1% event. And we're saying 2090 at our high sea level change scenario. And you're thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute, this map looks really familiar. It looks a lot like what I saw in Climate Ready Boston, except they said it was 2070. Is it 2070 or 2090? Well, the truth is they are two different models, but the inputs are very much similar that we're using for the models and the foundation for the models. So you would expect, and we're very glad to see, that the pictures match up almost identically. A little bit different because the purpose of the model is a little bit different. One's a life cycle model versus frequency. If you're interested, Lisa can get into that in a different conversation. But the floodplain looks the same. And then you're like, okay, I can get over that. But what about this 2070 versus 2090? Here's what I want you to take away. Sea level change is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. We're actually looking at 46 inches of sea level change, whereas Climate Ready Boston, when it originally came out using the Boston Harbor flood risk model before the predecessor to the Massachusetts coastal flood risk model, it actually came out with 40 inches in 2070. So we're showing 46 inches in 2090. They're showing 40 inches in 2070. The bottom line is they're pretty close and they're very compatible for planning purposes. With that being said, you see here what your flood pathways look like, where the entrance points are between now and 2090. Now, some of these may be more near term than others. And some you might notice there's no flood pathway. There's no flood pathway up there by what's here on the flag or on the screen shown as North End Playground, but you all know it as Langone Park. And we're going to talk about that here in a minute. But there's a very good reason why there's no flood pathway there. Other areas, especially down at Long Wharf, you see that flood pathway. That flood pathway goes all the way in up to Congress Street and causes significant impacts. And most of you are on this phone saying, well, you should have been here last Tuesday when at the astronomical high tide, we already had inundation splash over near the aquarium. I know because I was there looking at it. And so I recognize that it's a near-term flood pathway, and that's why we're so happy that our sponsor and our partnership with the city is just continuing to move forward. They're not waiting on the Corps of Engineers and the federal government to come up with the albeit solution. They recognize the need to address near-term flood pathways, recognizing that we're here for the long term. And so we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Next slide. All right. You saw Kate talk a little bit about federal interest. Federal interest is a very cold word. I recognize it's a very cold word. So I wanted to put some pictures and some understanding and some context behind federal interest, because federal interest is what Congress requires us to identify. But federal interest is just more than an economic monetary return on investment. And hey, if we do this project, we're going to save FEMA this much money, and therefore let's do it. It's so much more than that. It all does revolve around the protection of the people, but it's protection of the people in multiple different categories. You've got, of course, protection of evacuation corridors. You just heard Matthew Kearney talk about earlier, the 96 hours out. When a storm's coming 96 hours out, you need to have evacuation and emergency planning. The city has a wonderful setup of community shelters and areas to go. But then the idea is really, can you afford to go to an evacuation shelter for 5 days? Is that really what we're looking at in the future? And so looking to protect those evacuation corridors, protection of critical infrastructure and the transportation. Your transportation, your T system is critical infrastructure. There is no doubt. In East Boston, over 50% of the community utilizes the T in order to get to work each day. In Charlestown, it's a little bit lower because of maybe the availability or the traffic ability, but it's down around 40%. 40% is still a significant portion of the population who depends on critical infrastructure. And 3 inches of water might mean 2 weeks down. 6 inches of water might mean 2 months down. More than 6 inches of water, the T could be critically impacted for long term. And then what happens to the cost and to the city traffic, because now you have to bring in buses, and what is the cost of bringing in buses in addition to the repair? So it's very much in the federal interest to protect both critical infrastructure, schools, government offices, fire stations, police, but also that critical infrastructure that is the T system, as well as the ferries. Let's not forget about the MBTA and the ferry system. Now you see that lower right. This is where I like to bring it up, and a lot of people do not combine protection of natural resources with protection of the people or even federal interest. And I ascribe to the land ethic by Aldo Leopold. I think he's a man before his time. 1940 Sand County Almanac, if you want a good reading. But his idea was like, look, if you do everything from an anthropogenic standpoint of what's good for the human race, but you forget about your natural resources, what you're going to find over time is you're going to find degradation of your ecosystem. You're going to have public health issues. You're going to have nuisance species. You're going to have invasive species. And so really, it is just as much about the protection of natural resources as it is about protecting the human our need to develop the community. So from my perspective, it's not an if or, it is a and both natural resources as well as protection of the people. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth in a few minutes. But let's go to the next slide. By the way, I have been told I speak very quickly, and I apologize for that. But again, I'm trying to get to the point where we can have that two-way conversation. So I apologize in advance if it feels like I'm rushing through this. Luckily tonight we don't have any Spanish interpreters, because I really give them a run for money trying to be able to keep up. But okay, let's talk a little bit about risk. Risk is the only math equation that I'm going to ask you to consider for tonight. And that is, risk in and of itself is not just a hazard. Storm surge may be a hazard. It may not be a hazard. Storm surge may be a natural event that helps the urban salt marsh habitat thrive and adapt over time. However, storm surge could actually be a hazard to the community, as many of you experience in Riley and Grayson. So let's talk a little bit about what is the risk of storm surge. And that is, what is the probability, how often it might happen, multiplied by the consequence, the level of impact of it happening. When you multiply those two together, that gives you the risk level. And so, for example, back before, maybe when it was just Hog Island at the time, and there was no Fredericks Park or VFW or Bennington Street, Belle Isle Marsh was subject to storm surge, but it was a thriving marsh habitat. And so when the storm surge happened, it was low probability and it was a low impact. So it was a 1. So it wasn't even really a risk. It might have actually been considered an opportunity or a negative risk. But as over time, now we're in downtown near Long Wharf. And we've built right up to the water's edge. And so now you have an astronomical high tide, and over time you're going to have sea level change. So the probability is actually going to increase over time. And the impacts, while back in the 1800s, the impact was low because everybody was used to it. Today, the impact is we have built a lot of condos, we've built a lot of businesses, we've built a lot of roads with critical infrastructure and utilities. And so the impact is much higher. So now you have the high probability times a big impact, and that gets you that 4 in the upper right-hand corner. So when we talk about risk and we're trying to identify and prioritize and phase all of these projects, and we say, well, we're doing it based off of a risk level. That is, we're looking at what is the probability of it happening times what is the consequence of it happening. And from there, we can identify, okay, we need to prioritize these projects. And that's a very good objective way for us to be able to prioritize and phase projects and identify where our investments should be. And so that's when we talk about coastal storm risk management. That's what we're talking about. And sometimes it might be absorbing the risk and adapting to the risk, as opposed to trying to reduce the probability. And that's called reducing the consequence of it. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that next. Next slide. All right. So if we're going to reduce the risk, we either have to reduce the probability or we have to reduce the consequence, that impact. We have 3 kind of drawers that we look at in trying to develop these tools. First drawer is reducing the probability. If we want to reduce the probability of doing something, we've got a very hard picture up in the right corner of a wall with a gate and the vehicle coming out of it. So if we build a wall at the water's edge, the water is not going to come in. And so we're reducing the probability of it coming in. But what if we say, okay, allowing water to do what water is going to do. And we've learned over time that sometimes controlling the water, trying to stop the water isn't the best scenario. Maybe we just need to adapt or accommodate for the water coming in. And you see this already in Boston. You see it at the Commonwealth Pier in South Boston, where they have the World Trade Center, and they're doing building adaptation and aqua fence and elevating all of their fire, mechanical, and electrical to the roof. You see this at Spalding Hospital, and you see it in some areas that were previously built, maybe over in near Constitution Wharf and that area over there, where the first floor is a parking garage and parking, and then you have homes on the second and third floor. These are all just examples of adapting or accommodating. You're not stopping the water from coming in. You are not changing the hydrodynamic. If you're an engineer, you're not changing the hydrodynamic characteristics of the water. You're simply saying, water, you're coming in, but I want to reduce the impacts of that. The challenge in Boston of a non-structural physical type adaptation like this is the fact that you're talking 1 to 5 days. If it's 1 day, great. We've rode out the storm, we've vertically evacuated, we've reduced the inundation, and we're good to go. But if you're talking about 1 to 5 days, 5 days, can you imagine 5 days where you can't go to work? 5 days where you're keeping the water out, but you're forced to stay in and you're trapping yourself in. What is the impacts on not only the economy, but on your personal well-being if you need to go to work in order to pay rent? 5 days worth of work is over a month's worth of rent, and how many days worth of groceries? 5 days worth of a storm. Many people in Boston don't have the ability to set aside 5 days worth of food or 5 days worth of money in order to buy 5 days worth of food. So these are some of the considerations that we need to look at when we look at non-structural physical. And we're wrestling that specifically in downtown North End Wharf District. We are wrestling with that right now. The third drawer is to manage. This one is really outside of the federal interest, but we will absolutely assist the communities and states in planning for these. These are called non-structural or non-physical. So this is where zoning comes in, permitting comes in, requirements come in as far as planning requirements. If your building is more than this square feet and you're this close to the water's edge, you must elevate to 40 inches. You must accommodate stormwater management for so many acreage. Those types of things. You're not building anything, and you're not necessarily reducing the probability, but you are reducing the consequence still through a non-structural, non-physical type tool. So those are some of the tools. So you're thinking to yourself, well, what are we looking at then for downtown North End? Let's go to the next slide. First, we're going to look at what provides the maximum protection. I'm going to put a snow globe over the top of Boston, right at the edge of Boston Harbor. And maybe I'll drop the snow globe at low tide, and that way the high tide and the storm surge doesn't come in. Reality is that's probably not physically possible to build, although it would be great. And I have in some projects in the Arctic recommended the Game of Thrones ice wall, although it wasn't to that same extent. But so we look at what provides that maximum level of protection, structurally or non-structurally. And then we look at what is possible to build. Clearly, a snow globe around the city of Boston, as pretty as it would be when the snow is falling, is not possible to build. So what is possible to build? Can we build a wall upland of the existing seawall? Maybe there's space, maybe there isn't. Do we have to go seaward of the existing seawall? Well, what about permitting? How are we going to work through for that? So then we have to look at, what is even possible to build? And then we have to ask ourselves the question, this is where you all come in. What is the best fit for the downtown North End and Wharf District? All right. And I'm going to be honest with you. Every single person in this room has a different perspective. Many of you probably have the same perspective if you're in North End or Wharf District, because you all have been working on a plan. However, your perspective comes from your socioeconomic background, your career field, your experience, your education, or just your hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Your perspective is going to be a little bit different. That's where we have to look at it strategically and consider all of your input, but also understand what is truly the best fit for downtown North End and Wharf District, because we are making this recommendation to Congress. And this is, I don't want to say competing, because on a bipartisan level, we have a history of working across lines and making sure that these types of projects are funded. However, we do have to tell a story in order to help the taxpayers in Omaha, Nebraska, understand why is it important to build this project in Boston Harbor. The same way you would expect the folks in Omaha, Nebraska to tell a story explaining why do they need a levee project after the 2019 levees broke and Omaha flooded in downtown by the university and the federal district. So it's important for us to tell that story. So that's step one. Step two is understanding if we do nothing, what happens? And that's one of two questions I want you to leave here tonight with. Not only what is the best fit for downtown, but two questions. Number one, what happens if we don't do anything? If our plan, the best fit, doesn't fit with what the community wants or what the state or the city wants to invest in, what does it look like? Is it an extreme burden on you all? Is it nothing is done? Is it something is done, but it's piecemealed and ends up being greater risk in the future? What happens? The final thing I want you to think of is what happens if we do something? What happens if we recommend this is the best fit for downtown North End and Wharf District? The city agrees, the state agrees, we go forward and we build it. What are your greatest concerns? So with those three things in mind, I want to kind of set the table for the rest of this discussion and for the future discussions, because this is the start of the conversation. This is not the end of the conversation. This isn't even the formal NEPA process. This is just Jeff and the city coming to you and wanting to get your input and feedback as to what we've seen, validate what we've seen as the existing and future without project condition, but also give us input as to what you think the right answer would be. Next slide. All right. We can pause here for questions. While we pause here for questions, let's jump to the next slide, because I've learned about leaving it on this slide for too long. It starts to confuse people. But let's open it up real quick for questions or comments.
So if you have a question, I will ask you use the raise your hand feature. So if you go to the bottom of your screen, you should be able to use one of the gestures, raise your hand, we can call on you. Jeff, I haven't seen any questions come through in the chat yet.
All right. Well, I'm going to give it that 10-second uncomfortable pause. All right. Yes, your audio is working just fine. That was that 10-second uncomfortable pause. And now we're going to kind of jump into the tool. So like we talked about, okay, we want to reduce the risk. Might be reducing the probability, might be reducing the consequence, but we want to reduce the risk. We have a series of tools. We can do it structurally by building something to reduce the probability, non-structural adaptation, which is still building something, but it's reducing the consequence as opposed to changing the water. Or we can work with the city to make some recommendations for management measures that we call non-structural, non-physical, and that is your zoning, planning, permitting type legislation, regulatory actions. But here is a slide that hopefully looks familiar to you. This is a slide of tools that was in Climate Ready Boston. The reason it's still up here is because it's a good slide. It's a good picture, and it matches exactly what the Corps of Engineers kind of looks at when we're looking at those structural solutions, those building solutions. And then in the lower right, we'll start there since it's the only one that is kind of non-structural physical. But that is, again, Commonwealth Pier, looking at some of the Boston Children's Museum is actually looking at some non-structural physical adaptations. Spalding Rehabilitation Hospital in Charlestown. Again, you're not changing the water, but you're taking yourself out of the floodplain and reducing the consequence. The problem there is again, we're talking about, 1 to 5 days of impacts, 10 tide cycles. What does that look like? Harbor Tower is a great example of what you all are looking at in the Wharf District area. Harbor Tower 1 and 2 are currently going through, and we're going to show a picture of what that plan looks like, where they recognize the need to defend today, just based off of Riley and Grayson in 2018. But we also have a raised harbor walk. If you're familiar with the Wharf District plan, that's an example where you have an existing Chapter 91 harbor walk. Therefore, you have some restrictions and requirements already, and you have some public realm space already. So perhaps the tool that we can recommend is just a raised harbor walk. Is that raised harbor walk inland of the existing harbor walk, or is it actually outboard, where we're actually extending into the water in order to elevate that harbor walk? To be determined, and we'll talk about that location by location, but it's based off of real estate constraints and structural constraints. What is the integrity of the existing wall? What is the integrity of the buildings, and how close are they to the existing wall? Maybe we need to go outboard of the existing solution. But it would be an idea of blending a feature, a flood wall, into a new harbor walk at a higher elevation. Another one would be raised berms and dunes. We've got a good example of that, but really one example of where we're looking at this is actually Columbia Point by the JFK Library in South Boston, Dorchester area. So there's an existing harbor walk there with a revetment out there. So it's a great spot for us to look at, maybe just putting a raised berm, shallow foundation type thing there. The good news about a raised berm and dune versus a vertical flood wall, which you see in the far lower left, is that it can go shallow foundation, so you don't need to be intrusive into the ground, into the deep. However, when you look at a raised berm versus a vertical flood wall, you're talking about a significantly different footprint from the perspective of real estate impact. So a raised berm and dune stops the water and stops seepage because it's so wide. If you have a, say, 5-foot high berm, you're probably going to have a 25 to 35 foot requirement for foundation and for real estate. That could be impactful when you're talking about the limited space that's available in downtown and North End. So maybe the answer is that vertical flood wall, because if you need a vertical flood wall in the lower left, yes, it goes deeper, but that's how it stops the seepage and the erosion and the undermining of the wall, is because you go with a deep pile foundation. But because you're going with a deep pile foundation and it's a vertical wall, you have a much smaller footprint. Now, we're going to talk about this in a minute, but just because it's here as a vertical flood wall does not mean that when you look at it after the project is constructed, it's just going to be a plain gray wall that water slaps up against and then rushes back and creates an erosion problem on the nearshore habitat. There's options for that, but walls do have a smaller footprint, generally speaking. And then nature-based solutions. I think Kelly has an article she's going to put in the chat. The reality is, in downtown, Wharf District, North End, There's not the same type of nature-based solutions that you might have if you are in Belle Isle Marsh, East Boston, Constitution Beach, Dorchester, the Neponset River type areas, where there's a lot of space for adaptability, but also existing green infrastructure. So nature-based solutions may look a little bit different in downtown. So maybe it's integrating into Langone the way Langone did. Maybe it's integrating into Columbus Park. Maybe it's Martins Park near Children's Museum. These are examples of gray-green hybrid solutions where nature-based solutions on the simplest foundation is using engineering the way nature intended it to be in order to adapt and live with water. So living levees, horizontal type levees, those are an example of nature-based solutions in that perspective. But maybe it's a matter of diverting water or creating some green seating area, natural berms, et cetera, et cetera. That might be the extent of nature-based solutions. So there's a great engineering with nature. It's a trademark from the Corps of Engineers down there within our Engineering Research Development Center, where we specifically investigate how we can engineer with nature. And there was an article here in the chat that is specific to Boston and the Boston Harbor community, and uses this study as kind of a case study for different tools and where and how tools might be used. So nature-based solutions. All right, I think we got some pictures next. Jeff likes pictures. I learn great by pictures. So a raised harbor walk. We could have used the Langone Park, but we're going to use that for a different picture. So for here, let's use Martins Park. And so you can see here that what they did is they just elevated the existing harbor walk and then integrated it into the community behind it. 10 years from now, people will have no idea that project was actually a resilience project. That's the goal. That's what we want, is to be able to integrate resilience into the community, into the fabric of the community, so that way it works when it needs to work, but the other 360 days out of the year is just a beautiful kind of piece of the community's character. New Bedford, Massachusetts. Now, it looks big, it looks great, but I will tell you that the hurricanes and the tropical storms that project was constructed to protect, and the harbor and the scallop industry that utilized New Bedford, that's an important piece of infrastructure, and it needed to be that big and that hard. However, on top of it, they integrated a recreational path. So there's kids and there's community members today that see that as a beautiful, elevated recreation opportunity in order to look out at the open ocean, not understanding that it was intended to, not intended to necessarily protect them from the water, although it does a great job of it. Next slide. All right, vertical flood walls. We mentioned Langone Park. If you've been out there, this woman is sitting on those steps and she's watching a beautiful sunset. It's beautiful. What she doesn't realize is underneath those steps right there, that is a vertical flood wall built with a deep pile foundation. And so when the storm comes, those seats aren't going anywhere and it protects. Now, behind that and tied into that, you'll see some elevated baseball fields that were reconstructed a few years back. And you know what? Those flood walls or those baseball fields are all elevated. And then there's some areas between the two flood walls, or I'm sorry, flood walls and the baseball fields. And the city can drop stop logs in there, some barriers in there. So when the storm comes, that area is resilient from sea level change induced coastal storm risk. And so Langone Park is an example of, it doesn't have to be just a hard gray surface. This picture to your right, we're going to do a build here in just a second, but this is Harbor Tower. All right, this is Harbor Tower, and this is a community of people that was impacted, almost inundated during Grayson and Riley. And so in the future, it for certain will be impacted. So let's take a look. Next slide. This is what it looks like. You see here, go back one slide. where the two people are, and you see there's glass barrier that is flood glass, and that's structurally engineered to withhold water. And then when the storm's predicted to come, you can drop some gates and barriers in there. So let's go to the next slide. Your car is inundated. That's one thing that we have to consider, is just because you can protect the people doesn't mean you can necessarily protect everything else in the area. But at the same time, when that water is there, people can't leave. And so that's, again, the trade-off of non-structural physical versus structural, reducing the probability. All right, next slide. All right, going outboard, there's an example from Charleston, South Carolina. Really won't talk about that. That's just the idea that, you know, based off of space constraints and structural integrity of the existing wall, it might be best for us to just go outboard of the existing wall. And you're all thinking to yourself, what about CZM, and what about permitting, and what about this, and what about that? I got it. Tracking. We're already working with the state and the city to identify where those constraints are, and how can we kind of navigate around and through those challenges. And then finally, the Fox Point Hurricane Barrier. I'm only bringing this up, and this is, if you go on Google, you can Google Fox Point Hurricane Barrier in Providence, Rhode Island. You're going to see a hurricane barrier, and you're going to see a beautiful bridge in front of it. 4-point channel between downtown, the Wharf District, and South Boston, the Moakley Courthouse. We are looking at setting up a storm surge barrier. If you're thinking to yourself, hey, Boston Water Sewer Commission thought about the same thing. Well, we are coordinating very closely with Boston Water Sewer Commission because they are a key stakeholder in our project. Plus, there is a combined interest of doing a storm surge barrier at 4-point channel. But why would we look at a storm surge barrier there? It's not because we want to see a new Northern Avenue bridge put on top of it. That is not the federal interest. Maybe that's a local interest, and maybe that ends up happening in someday. What we are concerned about is the number of railway crossings, the number of T crossings, the number of commuter rail, the roads upstream, where the tributary, the drainage enters into the actual navigational portion of 4-point channel. I know you giggle when I say navigational portion of 4-point channel, but the truth is it is a federal navigation project, and it used to be navigable. However, today, the reality is with all those crossings there's too many single points of failure. There's too much risk, and there's too much long-term impact if we were to close off those rail systems and those roads for long periods of time. So the reality is the way to reduce the risk most efficiently, certainly not the cheapest, but most efficiently and effectively, is to put a storm surge barrier there. Now, if you are concerned that during more frequent events, when the storm surge barrier isn't closed, that you're still going to be impacted, we understand that. So we're not saying just because we put a storm surge barrier there, we're not going to put anything behind it. What we're saying is that for those larger events where it would create a lot of upstream risk, we are saying that a storm surge barrier is the most effective and efficient tool for us to use in that toolkit. All right, next slide. So preliminary locations. I'm going to go very quickly through these because we've got so many people on the call, and I want to make sure that we're able to focus in based off of where your interests are. So if we go to the next slide, I pause here, hand it over to Kate, and she's going to give us some ground rules.
Give you a chance to get a sip of water quick before we dive into the preliminary alignments. So just to refresh everyone's memory, kind of bring it back to how you can help today. The goal is to be able to collect your questions and your concerns. After Jeff walks through the 3 different area breakdowns, he's going to walk through the different alignments first. We're going to do an overview, and then we'll be able to dive into the question and answer. We'll flip to the slide you need to be able to kind of walk through your questions. But what we're really looking for at this point is help with answering, did we miss any areas of risk? Did we miss anything that you need us, that you think we should be protecting as well? And what really is important to you all about how the Army Corps is doing this work with the city. Something else to think about is if there are ways that I can make this information more accessible to you. So we are going to be continuing this conversation, as Jeff said. This is the start of the conversation or continuation of the conversation, not the end. So everything that Jeff will present to you is preliminary draft. And this is the concept where your feelings as you look at some of these alignments are valid, and I want you to just note for yourself and share with us if you're comfortable what you're feeling when you see some of the possible alternatives that we see on a screen. Because if you are feeling a certain way, it is likely something that we need to hear so we can learn more about what are some of those growth edges that we're running into together. The way I frame this work is we're going to be working with the Corps for many years to be able to see this work to fruition. But this is too important to not give that critical feedback at this stage of the process. We're really lucky, as Jeff has mentioned, with our partnership, that we're really able to get this first early look at what the draft alignments are. A lot of communities that the Corps might have worked with in the past didn't necessarily get a first look action. So I really want us to think about that and take advantage of that as a community too. So what we're going to do with the information, the questions, we're going to do our best to answer them as best we can tonight. And if we can't answer them tonight, I'm taking notes. So if you see me look away, I'm just jotting down the questions that are asked so I can get you the best answer to those questions and post them to our website. If you're asking a question, you're probably not alone in needing an answer too. We're going to post these presentation slides. There is a set of slides already posted from our in-person engagements that we hosted last week. So these slides are very similar, so they're exactly the same with the exception of the Zoom slides. So you can go ahead and take a look at those on the boston.gov/USACE-study website. And then I'll share opportunities on how you can stay in touch with us. We will have the opportunity for you to provide written feedback if that's the uh, most comfortable way to give feedback, or you can make an appointment for office hours to be able to meet with me and with Jeff virtually. And we can also look into if in-person works better when we have availability to do that this coming winter. So the goal is that the information that we are hearing at these community sessions that we've been having this year, I will be able to report back in the new year with that information to share what we heard and how we might have been making changes behind the scenes that we can present out to you before that NEPA draft environmental impact statement notification or official public comment period that Jeff mentioned, which will happen in 2026. So the goal is that we're adding new information, we're making changes, and we're sharing it with you as part of that spiral staircase that we're walking together. So with that, a quick reminder that these projects that we're currently working on as an all of government city department approach are not going to stop because of our work with the Corps. We're continuing to move projects to the next deliverable milestone. For Long Wharf, that means continuing our schematic design work. For Christopher Columbus Park, that means initiating the next step of resilient and park capital planning. With that, I also want to say thank you to our community-led stakeholder partner groups with the North End Waterfront Climate Alliance and Wharf District Council, who've also been leading community stakeholder engagement-led plans as part of the downtown North End and Wharf District work. And so this is where I will hand it back to Jeff to kind of walk through how we've been able to work with our community groups and how the Corps has been able to create design efficiencies. Jeff, you ready? Back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, thanks, Kate. So again, thank you to the North End Waterfront Climate Alliance. I've met with Cheryl and the team many a times, as well as Derek and the Arup team, walking the entire alignment and the plan. And so you will see here in a minute that plan is, at least the alignment piece, is built into as one of our alignments, recognizing that not only is it a viable option, but it's also kind of the preferred option from that particular community, at least the stakeholders that we've talked to, as well as the city. Same thing with the Wharf District, meeting with the Wharf District Council, as well as Derek and the Arup team from that perspective, and walking and meeting with the aquarium team. And so we recognize that. And so that way that alignment is also, but, and I just want to brace everybody that the National Environmental Protection Act, as well as the, federal government and the stakeholders in Omaha, Nebraska, they expect us to look at all sorts of alternatives and alignments, and we have. And so for each of these areas, we have identified 2 potential alignments. One is much longer and much more intrusive and probably expensive, but it's not the easy button. And then one is a little bit more inland, but not necessarily the easy button. So I just want to get everybody's on the same page of, we're not trying to hurt anybody. We're not trying to ignore anybody. But we have an obligation to federal taxpayers across the nation, as well as to the National Environmental Policy Act, Protection Act for NEPA, and to ourselves and to you to look at options. So let's go to the next slide. We're going to look at 1 and 2 is where I want to focus on. Number 3, we're going to touch on it a little bit. That's Charles River. That's a new Charles River Dam. That is in the scope of the project, not the dam itself, but the area tying into the dam right there by TD Gardens and the Washington Street Bridge and Converse. That little strip right there, that is looks like it's going to be a wall or an elevated harbor walk of some sort. So that's really where I want to focus tonight on, is the Sumner Tunnel area, the north end, as well as Wharf District. You'll see a green line, and then you'll see a dark blue. Now, remember, as we move forward in these, all that blue shading is the potential flooding in the flood area after the flood pathway the water enters through that flood pathway. So the idea is to cut off those flood pathways. As we go to the next slide, the green alignment here that you see is what you're expecting. This is what, if you're in the Wharf District, the green line is the Wharf District plan. Pretty close. I think there's some minor differences where maybe you go straight across over by Rose Wharf and we jaunt in. But I will say, with both the Wharf District plan as well as with our plan, there is impact to maritime traffic and some of these smaller marinas, which is why it's important to kind of have this conversation with you all, is because it's not going to be just a quick come in and construct and then move out. There could be some areas that are permanently filled, as you can see over there in the vicinity of Rose Wharf, where the blue is cut off, and it's going to be permanently filled in because you can't build the structure there necessary. So maybe that's a public realm opportunity, or maybe it is something else. But that's something that we need to communicate and coordinate and collaborate with federal resource agencies as well as the state. Now, the elephant in the room is this blue line. This blue line is where I want you to consider the fact that we had to look at alternatives. If the real estate impact of the green line, because of permanent easements and acquisitions, is such that it's not palatable, or it's too expensive, or it takes too long for investment, we have to have an alternative. And the alternative is that darker blue line. That darker blue line follows, kind of, for the most part, roadways, public rights of way, existing harbor walk, in order to put that line of protection up that cuts off that major flood pathway. So if we go back one slide, not forward, but back one slide, I want you to see that giant flood pathway that comes in and goes all the way through Dock Square, downtown Boston, up to Congress Street. So if we do the dark blue line, that cuts that flood pathway off. Very likely it can be done for a lower cost. Very likely it can be done in a much quicker manner. Those are factors. Is that the only factor? No. One big factor is the fact that if you go to the next slide, If we do the dark blue versus the light green, that means everything on the seaward outboard side of that dark blue line still requires some sort of adaptation. Maybe it's a harbor tower style adaptation where it is flood-proof glass and vertical evacuation. Maybe it's elevating electrical, fire suppression, mechanical up out of the floodplain. And understanding that, you know, when the storm comes, people have to evacuate either vertically or out of the area. But there's risk there. And if you're on a pier, as opposed to a pile supported pier, as opposed to fill, then perhaps, you know, you're at risk from uplift anyway. And so it's a matter of defend in place till you can, and then you have to evacuate and abandon. You know, these are tough conversations that we have to evaluate. That's why I said the dark blue line is not the easy button, but it is an option that cuts off a major flood pathway and a lot of economic and socioeconomic impacts to the T, to the community, and to the economic hub of Boston. But it's not the easy button. So I just want to kind of make that clear. So let's go to the next slide, because similarly, we're looking at an area near in the north end from Christopher Columbus Park. That area is very similar to what you see in the Christopher Columbus Park that the city's working on. Why? Because we're all about adapting and adopting institutional regional level plans, especially if they make a lot of sense. But as you move north from, you know, Sergeant's Wharf and Lewis Wharf, you'll notice that that dark blue line kind of cuts off at Fleet Street. And that's because as you move further down, well, you've already noticed that Langone Park and that area absorbs a lot of that. And then the area by the Coast Guard Station, Boston, is already elevated out of the floodplain. And then when you get to Hanover Street, elevation climbs quickly. However, we recognize that there are a lot of commercial businesses as well as condos along Lewis Wharf and that whole section, you know, that those aren't just empty piers. We fully recognize that. But again, NEPA requires us to do it, as well as it's you know, it's our duty to the taxpayers across the nation to make sure that we are evaluating options. Both of these are viable options that have a significant benefit to the larger economic and socioeconomic communities within the Boston area. But that doesn't mean it's the best fit. Because again, you have those non-structural, non-physical, non-structural physical approaches that you would have to do in order to manage the risk to everybody outside the line of protection. So that's the two slides that I want to kind of touch on. And what I really want to do is kind of pause there. We can go to the next slide. Again, it's the New Charles River Dam. I kind of talked about that a little bit earlier. And if you want to talk about this, we can. The dam itself, we're not looking at dam modifications because, quite frankly, that would have, A, kicked this study to a much longer time horizon, and B, it would have required a significant partnership between us and the state, much higher cost than even the 6-year, $6 million study is, because of the fact that it's a dam safety modification. So with that being said, the state is working with the Corps of Engineers on a specific study looking at the New Charles River Dam, and is a modification necessary? So at this point, we are simply tying into the existing dam, both on the Paul Revere Park side as well as the Lovejoy Wharf side. But we're not looking at actually modifying the dam itself. In the future, that might be something that's required to be done, but that's not what we're looking at right now. But what I want to do is I want to kind of focus this on feedback, questions, and comments from what you saw with our two different. Let's go back, I think, 3 slides, and we're going to go over how you can make comments in a second. But this is where we're going to land. Is I want folks to just be able to look on this and maybe ask some questions, make some comments, and give us initial feedback on these 2 different alignments, positives and negatives of both. Like I said, dark blue line, probably cheaper, probably quicker. However, a lot more risk to the community outside, behind, on the other side of the wall. And maybe it's not in line with what you're looking at and looking for. So, all right, let's go forward now. And I'll turn it over to Kate. She'll facilitate the remainder of the meeting. But, you know, I've got thick skin, and this is your opportunity. This is the start. This is not your only opportunity. This is the start of your opportunity to kind of give feedback. Okay.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, so quick summary. We're doing long-term projects to address long-term risk. The current focus today is let's get into some questions, concerns, reactions, and then subsequent feedback on designs and construction alternatives. That will be what we're continuing into 2026. So as Jeff has said, and I've mentioned too, beginning, not the end, we're going to continue these conversations into 2026 and beyond. So I'm gonna leave these up. If you have a smartphone, you can take a picture of the QR code. Kelly, my colleague in the Office of Climate Resilience, is also putting those same links in the chat. So you can go ahead and click on those. They'll open in a new window. But basically, these will stay open for the rest of the project. If you need additional availability outside of the times in the appointment booker, just go ahead and shoot me an email. My contact information is right on the Army Corps project page on boston.gov. You click send an email and you ask for different times that we can meet with you. We're happy to meet to be able to walk through specific or small group questions. Jeff and I are also happy to come to your community meetings if you have an organization or a stakeholder group that you're here and you represent. We're happy to come to you, whether that's virtually or when we can get scheduled the next in-person meeting with all of us to meet together. Thank you, Kelly, for putting my contact in the chat. So with that, we're going to go ahead and transition. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment, but I'll be able to pull them up and walk through the slides. I'm going to ask folks if you'd like to come off mute to raise your hand first. You'll go to the React button, you'll raise your hand. I will call on folks in the order that they raise their hands. And if we have a moment where no one raises a hand, I'm happy to go to the chat where we actually have our first question about the blue line. So I actually am going to go back to the right slide so we can talk about the blue line. Thank you, Marilyn, for that question. So I'm going to go back to this overview slide, Jeff, for the first question from the chat. What does the blue line look like? And folks, go ahead and just keep adding them to the chat or raise your hand.
Yeah, so Marilyn, a wonderful question, and honestly, it depends. It depends where we're at. So there could be an opportunity if space allows, and if it's right along a public roadway where you adapt it into maybe a new separation between vehicle traffic and pedestrian traffic as an alternate means of transportation, right? So it might be a stub wall that goes through there. You notice that it goes right along the Marriott Hotel. It goes around the Marriott Hotel. So clearly there, you're not just going to put up a wall that, segregates or separates the hotel, right? So it could just be, it could be anything from a buried wall, a berm, seating area integrated into a wall. There's lots of different potential options, or in some areas where there's an existing wall, and maybe it has like a facade on it. It could just be a vertical flood wall. So there's lots of different like options. I think the key takeaway for that one is the fact that it is set back along public existing rights of way and roadways. And so the idea there would be you could put a vertical wall and have a smaller footprint than potentially having to go outboard and build into the water.
And just to add on to Jeff's response, Marilyn, too, there will be in 2026, we're working to have some draft graphic to accompany this, to bring it to life instead of just lines on a page. So please sign up for email notifications at our website, the boston.gov/USACE-study to sign up for future meeting notifications where you'll be able to learn more about the next meetings when those are scheduled and then see some of those graphics too. I'm going to go to Joe Christo. You can go ahead and come off mute. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Nice job on the presentation, Jeff, Kate. Matt, Chris. Appreciate this project and all the hard work going into it. Jeff, I've asked this, a couple times in various meetings in other neighborhoods, but new neighborhood, new group here, so I want to just make sure I'm getting it out there again. And it's two questions. The first one is, appreciate you acknowledging, the engineering with nature team at Army Corps of Engineers, and that it's definitely different urban conditions in downtown North End than it is in other parts of the city. But wanted to ask if you guys are still exploring nature-based approaches wherever possible throughout this neighborhood. And then the second is about access. You touched on this a little bit, but whenever you're considering walls along the waterfront, our team at Boston Harbor now and so many others work so hard to make the most of this amazing 43-mile harbor walk we have throughout the city. Advocating for bringing people to it, as our recent study showed the 11 million people accessed it last year, while also protecting people from sea level rise. So how are you guys making sure to really prioritize that access while building in these protections?
Yeah, I'm going to start with the first question, Joe, and I appreciate it. And I know that Stone Living Labs and Engineering with Nature within our Engineering Research Development Center have a great working relationship, and it's always fun collaborating with them. So let's talk a little bit about resilience as a puzzle. I hope we can all agree that resilience in a puzzle and the Corps of Engineers is one piece of the puzzle. We're a pretty good piece of the puzzle because we bring a lot of money and expertise to the problem, or to the problem, to the project, right? And not to give myself a big head or anything, but that's just reality. We're not the only piece. There is responsibility and obligations from everyone, from the private stakeholders to the city, to the state, and even to the nonprofits. But one example of where you may want to investigate some engineering with nature is we have to build a new outboard wall. The outboard wall is going to cut off some area that is currently maybe some marina space, or maybe it's just some open water space, right? So maybe there's an opportunity there similar to what the city's already looking at for in maybe having some wetland creation and some tide pool areas in that area. Maybe it's an option of having some living levee or living shoreline opportunities at the foundation of the wall. And it's not going to do anything to stop the water from coming in during the project. However, it's an opportunity. If you're going to build something there, why not, look at other opportunities to supplement and complement the feature that we have to build in federal interest. So it's an opportunity for maybe educational purposes or the city resilience purposes to construct some living levees, living shorelines. There's lots of ways to integrate, complement, and supplement this federal project for coastal storm risk. And I would do everything but recommend just building a hard gray wall, because if you build a hard gray wall, the only thing you're going to do is create a vertical surface that exacerbates wave energy reflection, and whatever nearshore marine environment there is today, you're going to impact it into the future. And so I would encourage others to not look at the Corps of Engineers and say, you need to do this, but look at this and say, well, if the Corps of Engineers is bringing this project, how can we supplement and complement it? To your second question, if we build a hard gray wall that's 7 feet tall and cut off people's, it completely changes the character and the fabric of the community. We would never want to do that. Not to mention the number of waterfront users and working waterfront, from commercial fishing to transportation to the ferry system. We recognize the importance of access to the water. And so it's a key consideration in our planning. And so if we are cutting off access during a storm, we would open up, similar to Langone Park. If we have to build a wall, we would make sure that there's still access. But where possible, we would want passive features. Passive meaning you can walk right up to the waterfront still, and there's a wall there, there's a barrier there to reduce the probability, but you're not cutting people off from the water. I'm just going to be honest with people. The visual aesthetics are going to change. It has to change, because the reality is our forefathers in the area did not consider sea level change, subsidence, or the increase of inundation risk that we're seeing today. But the idea is let's make it change in a way that is pleasant and acceptable to the people of the community. So I appreciate the question, Joe, and I hope I answered it.
You did. I appreciate those, Jeff. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Joe. All right, I'm going to go to Mike. You can go ahead and come off mute, and then I've got question on deck with Joe in the chat.
Hey guys, thanks Jeff for a great presentation. Good to see you again. Hello, Lisa, as well. Yeah, obviously I think I'm pretty well apprised of things, but I think one question I did have, looking at the preliminary alignments that were shown in the area number 3. I don't know if you could speak a little bit more to how the alignment is projected or expected to tie in to the surrounding area. I know that's kind of at the limit of the existing New Charles River Dam, but it seems like that neon or the bright green there is tying into uh, the retaining wall for the approach to the Zackham Bridge. So I don't know if you could speak to thoughts and that particular line on the map on how that might change as things move forward with the New Charles River Dam, and also how that influences plan formulation more generally, just with the uncertainty and what's going to happen exactly at the dam location. Thanks.
Yeah. So to his point, the controlling elevation, the elevation of the dam right now is 12 feet ish. And so if you're looking at a 2090 flood, or if you're looking at 2070 flood, you're looking to need to be around 14 feet. So that's 2 feet that you don't have a room for. So the idea would be in the future, if they were to modify the dam, you would want the project that we construct to be adaptable. And that's not just for here, that's for across the entire region. So we would want to make sure that whatever we construct is adaptable for future needs if they do a dam modification itself. But the idea is today, we're going to tie into the dam because the dam is the controlling elevation. And to your point, for the green line, as it goes and ties into the footing to the bridge, the idea would be to take advantage of existing tie-ins. And if that means changing the approach to the bridge or tying into the existing tie into the bridge or to the converse center there, then that's exactly what we would look to do without impacting the structural integrity of the structure itself. And then you see right behind there, by the north end garage, we're looking at doing a little bit of a road grade change, because if you change the grade of the road, you can actually cut off the flood pathway. So that's what we're looking doing there, and I believe we're actually looking at going outboard of the existing feature that's there now. And then on the other side, of course, is just a small berm. You could call it nature-based solutions, or you can call it gray-green hybrid, but we'd be looking at doing an elevated berm to cut off the flood pathway on the other side of the New Charles River Dam.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Good seeing you.
Thank you, Mike. I'm going to ask Joe's question from the chat, and then Eve, you will be on deck. Question from Joe: since this is such a long-term project, are you considering how changing technology might improve your options? And
Yeah.
do you want to take a stab at that one, Jeff?
Yep, real quick.
Go for it.
We are absolutely looking. We're working with our Engineering Research Development Center. We're looking across the world. Some of the things that they're doing in Norway and Tokyo and Hong Kong, for example, as well as things we're doing across the nation as far as not only nature-based solutions, but Charleston, they're looking at glass flood walls. They're much more expensive, and there's a efficiency and effectiveness question about it, but we are absolutely looking at changing technologies as we develop. So from a value engineering perspective, from an effectiveness perspective, and from a cost perspective, we are considering changing technologies and how we might improve our options. And because this project is probably several years from construction, we are constantly working with other teams and looking at different options and research across the world, essentially, to identify possibilities. But Boston is unique in its tide swings, its wind-driven rain and waves and storms, as well as the nor'easters and the periods of impact. Closest would be some areas in Europe where they see 10 nor'easters or 10 extratropicals a month rather than 10 to 20 a year. I think Eve's got a question next.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Joe. Eve, when you're ready, come off mute.
Yeah, thank you. Really interesting. And I have seen the blue and green kind of lines before. I think my question is like, how will it be decided, the green versus the blue or something else? But if for some reason the blue is what is decided, and it's going to cut off a major flood pathway and, X percentage of the city will be safe, like, will the same amount of effort be put to the part on the right of the blue line, and how do you kind of work with those who are in that area to alleviate all their concerns with that?
Eve, that's a great question. And I'm going to give a lot of information here. And so I would encourage folks, whatever you can't frantically write down now, come back and watch the recording specifically to this point. I'm not sure. I think we're at 1 hour and 40 minutes. Now, we are going to evaluate both the economic return on investment, that is the damages reduced by building a feature here, either the green line or the blue line. What does that look like from maintenance? What does it look like from cost avoidance? What does it look like from actual damage to structures and risk to community and infrastructure? We're going to look at that monetary return on investment. We're also going to look at a socioeconomic return on investment. People's ability to access the T, people's ability to move along the roadways, people's ability and businesses, business disruptions. And we're going to look at all of those socioeconomic impacts as well. And we're going to kind of get some quantitative numbers out of that. And we're going to compare the green line to the blue line. Naturally, you're going to see that the costs associated, in other words, the impacts of not doing anything along the green line, is going to be higher because there's less people protected. However, maybe from a monetary perspective, there is more damages reduced by the blue line compared to the cost of constructing the blue or the green line. So that's called a benefit to cost ratio.
Yeah.
It includes both an economic and a socioeconomic. Now, there's other pieces of it. There's an environmental quality. We're going to compare the waterfront impacts and the impacts to the nearshore marine environment during construction and long term. We're going to consider the visual impacts to people who are used to the waterfront today, and it's going to change what the waterfront looks like. And so what do those impacts look like if we go blue line versus green line? And so we're going to actually develop some quantitative, we call them cost effective incremental cost analyses from that perspective. And then we're going to get some feedback from the community, because there could be some real estate stakeholders in the green line that says, look, I mean, we're already elevated, we're protected, and quite frankly, my real estate and my legacy is too important. I'm not interested. To date, I have not run into any of those people yet. Everybody in the community has been very supportive of the green line. I don't want anyone to think that there's somebody out there trying to hold out, because that has not been the case and has not been the communication. But it could be in the future, right? Because things happen over time. So those are some other considerations. Now, we're going to do all of that feedback analysis and qualitative analysis. And we're going to say, okay, the federal interest plan that we're recommending, the best interest, is blue line versus green line. If we say it's the blue line and the city's like, wait, hold on, we want the green line, the community wants the green line, we can say, okay, the cost of constructing the blue line is this, the cost of constructing the green line is this. It's not our decision to make. Let's make the recommendation to Washington, D.C. and allow the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works to evaluate the blue line versus the green line from their perspective. That's called a locally preferred plan, or in the NEPA process, it's called the proposed action would be the blue line, and then the preferred action would be the green line, and so we will present both. And then the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works in Washington, D.C. will make a decision. Yes, go with the green line. That is the plan we're going to invest in. Or no, we're going to go with the blue line. If we say we're going to go with the green line, whatever that cost difference is, the city of Boston or whoever the sponsor is during construction would then pay the difference in that, but the green line would get constructed. Now, to your other point is well, what happens if we construct the blue line? Well, if we construct the blue line, then perhaps the city is only responsible for doing the green line north in the north end, as opposed to having to do the full stretch. Or maybe we do the blue line, but then we look at some of that non-structural, structural type building adaptations and accommodations with those building owners and say, look, when the big storm happens, you're going to have to evacuate, but your structures and your structure contents are going to be safe. You're going to need to leave. Why does that not necessarily work? Because I have spoken with people in the North End who they weren't around when Grayson and Riley hit. Their cars floated down the street. They weren't in town to be able to move them. So while they were safe, they had a lot of damages sustained. So we recognize that isn't a perfect solution, but that's kind of how we evaluate and some of the things that we consider. And then if we recommend one versus the other, it's not the end of the story. It's not the end of the discussion. There's still options. If we recommend the blue line, the city wants the green line, and the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works says, look, the green line just doesn't make sense. It's too expensive, or it's too invasive. It has too many impacts. Whatever the decision's made, then we need to come back and we need to have another round of discussions about what does that path forward look like. But there are so many steps and so much time between now and that point. What I would say is provide feedback, provide comments, and help us tell the story and identify which plan is the right plan for downtown and North End. Again, that was a lot of information. I apologize, but that's why we record these things.
Yeah, no, great. I can imagine. I don't live anywhere near those areas, but I can imagine if you did, or you owned a business or whatever, you had, real estate there, and, you were like, oh, well, they're going to go, like, because I understand the blue line very likely will be a lot less expensive and, is cutting off that major flood pathway, that it can sort of be, you could feel like, oh, well, we're not going to get the same quality of treatment, if you like. So that's sort of what I'm like, how do you manage all of that? That must be very difficult, is what I'm thinking.
Thank you for the question. I want to be cognizant of time. I don't see any other questions or hands raised, Kate, but I would encourage folks, please schedule office hours. Please send us comments, even if it's don't, as long as it's not in a threatening form. It's like, please don't consider the blue line. Don't make threats. But I mean, like if it's as simple as that, tell us why. Because that blue line, folks, looking at the number of utilities, looking at the fact that you've got a tunnel that runs right through that area, the blue line is not the easy button. It's just an alternative that we're looking at. Don't think that we're trying to find the easy way out.
So thank you, Kelly, for posting links in the chat. If you signed up, you all registered, you're here tonight for the Zoom meeting. So what I will do too is once the recording is posted, you'll all get an email that the recording has been posted to our City of Boston YouTube page. You'll be able to share that, widely rewatch. And as Jeff said, we have our appointment books open. It is my full-time role to help make sure this information is accessible to you. So please let me know if there's another way that this information needs to be shared so that we can get some of that feedback that we're looking for. But keeping an eye on time and knowing that it is a busy week on a cold, chilly night, thank you all so much for participating with us tonight. Jeff, I'll give you the last closing statement before we sign off for tonight.
Regardless of what holiday season you celebrate, I hope everybody enjoys some time with family and gets an opportunity to enjoy Boston. It's such a beautiful community. I got to watch the tree lighting on Thursday in Boston Commons, and I love the people. I love the community, and I just look forward to working with you. This is not the end of the conversation. It's the start of the conversation. Please take advantage of these opportunities to communicate. And I will come talk to you again in the springtime when we hold other meetings like this and say, we got your feedback. We finished our analysis. This is what we're looking at. Give us your thoughts again. And then we'll go through another round of analysis. It's an iterative process. We're moving up a spiral staircase, and I just appreciate you all walking with us through it.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes our meeting for this evening. Appreciate everyone's time. Take care.